Live from Seoul, this is Arirang TV's special covering the United Nations Sustainable Development Summit that's taking place as we speak in New York.
President Park Geun-hye delivered a keynote speech at the UN Sustainable Development Summit. On today's Arirang special, we present an overall assessment of the summit and the role of Korea in promoting the UN's new Sustainable Development Goals. Now, co-hosting the show, I'm Song Se-ryun.
And I'm Kim Byung-ju. And this is well past midnight here in Seoul, and we have very brave and committed guests who are joining here with us. Of course, the top quality guests that we are very proud of. Dr. Choi Gang, the Vice President of Asan Institute of Policy Studies. Thank you very much for joining us.
Pleasure is mine.
Thank you. And Professor Park Eung-sun, the Vice President also for Korean Association of the United Nations. Thank you very much for joining us.
My pleasure.
Gentlemen, let's start with the background question here that will help our viewers understand very important event like this one. That is, we remember, for instance, President Park Geun-hye, this is like, for instance, her third time visit to United Nations, and then just last year we remember her giving a speech at a United Nations, was it a climate change summit? This time it's the United Nations Sustainable Development Summit. What is this? How is this different? What's the overall meaning of it?
Yeah, the Sustainable Development Summit this year is the conference of head of states and political leaders launching United Nations initiative on development planning. It's modeled after Millennium Summit in the year 2000, launching the Millennium Development Goals. So it's a gathering of political leaders, make a political pledge to implement and to adopt the whole planning for development in the future.
I see. And Dr. Choi,
Yes.
President Park spoke about 7 minutes on the SDGs. Could you summarize the key points that she made?
Of course, I think that we can divide her speech in two parts. One is the general principles in addressing sustainable development goal. Second part is South Korea's contribution, what kinds of things we will do into the future. I think first part, she put the human beings at the center of this issue. I think that's very important to us. Not the government, but the human being, individuals should be at the center of this goal. Second part, she actually underscored of the collaboration between the governments and NGOs and civic society in implementing these sustainable goals. And third, I think it's very important, the effective and democratic governance system of these. So these are the things we have to keep in mind in implementing the sustainable development goal. And then the second part, as I said, about what kinds of things South Korea will do, what kinds of contribution. Actually, I think she has made very concrete proposal. Initiative one is actually helping the young girls actually to provide them the better life. Actually, that's very special. And also pledged $200 million in implementing it. That's very important. Second part is about this. Of course, actually, it's Korea's own brand, Sema-Rundong, as a model for transforming the poor countries into modern or developed countries into the future. Actually, countryside is the one most suffers from this underdevelopment of the economy. And third, actually, she also actually put very great emphasis of the Busan the development, a high-level meeting, again, also South Korea's commitment in implementing the pledge in 2012. I think those are three major issues, actually, initiatives President Park has made at the United Nations General Assembly.
I see. The people focus and Sema-Rundong, those are very important issues. Dr. Kim, what would your key words?
I think many of us were perhaps expecting Sema-Rundong, the urban development program, to come up here. But her first point about young girls, that's a little bit of surprise to me indeed. Especially female president of Korea for the first time, sort of like talking about female issues in such an open and global way, and committing $200 million right, for the next 5 years on the Korean part. I thought that was a very concrete and very visible statement, in a way, what Korea has in mind in terms of making contribution to this.
Right, that concrete commitment. It seems like Korea is making a very huge commitment on this. Right. Now, let's take a look at the next report on the President Park's speech on the SDGs that was newly adopted at the UN Summit.
반기문 사무총장님, 각국 대표와 내외 귀빈 여러분, 이번 UN 개발정상회의에서 우리는 인류의 미래 비전인 2030 지속가능 개발 의제를 공식 채택하였습니다. 누구도 소외되지 않는 인류사회, 자연과 인간이 조화롭게 공존하는 지구의 미래를 향한 중요한 발걸음을 내디딘 것입니다. 저는 2030 지속가능 개발 의제에서 제시된 미래가 단순한 이상이 아니라 우리의 후손들을 위해서 반드시 달성해내야만 하는 실천적 목표가 되어야 한다고 생각합니다. 그리고 다음 세대와의 엄중한 약속이라는
Quite interesting point here, but for our general audience who are watching this program right at this point, Sustainable Development Goal, Millennium Development Goal we had 15 years ago, they could be in a way confusing. So we got to kind of like differentiate those two. One of the starting point I suppose would be talking about how these new goals for this time, Sustainable Development Goals, came about, and like 169 targets also as well. So how did they come about? How do we explain the reason behind setting these goals?
Actually, since the 2000, MDG
Millennium Development
Goals
right.
have been implemented, and now is to expire end of this year. There have been a lot of discussions what could be done as a follow-up, because the development itself is a daunting task for the whole international community.
Right.
So based on the trials and errors of this MDG planning and implementation, since 2012, the international community had a series of meetings and conferences, intergovernmental negotiations, and Secretary General reports and high panels. All these ideas converged and finally came out as 17 goals. It's much more than MDG had. They had 8 goals, but this time they expanded it and modeled after MDG, but it's more broader and inclusive and comprehensive approach to the development issues.
Right.
But actually, the problem is there are too many goals.
Right.
The 17 goals, of course, is very ambitious. The problem, how we can, which one should come first?
Right.
So that could be the one. Actually, but it's an extension of the Millennium Development Goal and an expansion of it. And also 169 is more concrete than the previous Millennium Development Goal, because actually specifically mentioned the 169, the tasks we have to accomplish. Of course, in terms of implementation, there is a clear guideline. And the problem, which one comes first? So that is the concern I have. But actually, in general, I think I fully agree that these 17 goals are very comprehensive and reflect the development, the challenges we have observed over the past 15 years. So I'm sure that these 17 goals are very, very comprehensive to take into account all the development that we have seen.
In that sense, do you think the SDG, of course, it builds upon the accomplishments of MDGs? Do you think we have a good foundation to build upon it?
Of course, definitely, because there's a general consensus about this goal, but whether it's a cup is half full or half empty, so it's not actually completely completed yet, but actually extension. We should not, of course, it's 2015 and 2030 is a target
I'd like
year.
to commend the initiative by the Secretary General Ban Ki-moon based upon the MDG. He'd like to have his own legacy, pushing up these issues for the whole international community. Actually, when MDG started in the year 2000, the world community was very delighted to see the whole community, international community, mobilized all the resources. They committed to mobilize all the financial, material, and human resources to help the developing nations. So it was all-out efforts by the stakeholders of the international community, states, civic groups, international organizations, and even multinational corporations are committed to bring the developing nations into the line for better nations.
So actually, the difference between the Millennium Goal and Sustainable Development Goal is that the first one is mainly focused on poverty issue, extreme poverty. But second one is much more comprehensive, also climate change, also the governance system, all these things. I think that's the Sustainable Development Goals. If they are completely implemented, I think that the future will be quite bright.
But going back to your previous point, having too many goals could be confusing, and it's this kind of statement to the world community in general as an audience. I mean, some people were saying Millennium Development Goal, 8 of them were too many to remember. Now we have 17, so...
and 169.
Right, 169 targets here. So I suppose that criticism about goals being too broad, too many fronts, I think is deserving in a way. When did they finalize the goals? Was it August?
Yes, August.
Who participated in the process?
Basically, it was intergovernmental negotiations. As I mentioned, it was supplemented by.
But this time, the Millennium Goals 15 years ago, usually the experts kind of like decide them top down. But this time, I heard there were a larger scope of participations, like experts plus government
That's
plus
right.
NGOs.
Right. Yeah, that's the difference in the negotiation processes. MDG mainly pushed by the OECD members, DACs, and the developed nations. But this time, more participation in sort of the partnership from the developing nations as well as civil organizations and experts as well.
No,
The
some
partnership-
people, yes.
Partnership and more participation, that sounds like an ideal situation because we have more bodies to work on it, but it's also idealistic as well. I mean, we need the global community's agreement in pushing this, but as we all know, conflicts, diplomatic controversies abound. Now, how do you think that it can be achieved, those agreements?
Of course, actually, because actually this is first I think that we have to say the previous development goal was a kind of voluntary reporting system. This time they actually added, it's not voluntary, it's a mandate reporting system, what they have done in implementing these sustainable development goals. So I think there's a higher level of implementation, I assume. Second, because NGOs and experts actively participate in setting the new agenda. So actually NGOs and civil societies will be monitoring the implementation of this goal into the future. So not just simply the governmental, the consensus or contribution, but also the NGOs is monitoring. For example, the anti-landmine issue was carried out not by the government, but because of the civil society. So there's a strong the pressure coming from the civil society in implementing these goals. So actually, so of course, there are 17 goals, 169 targets. Of course, maybe a little bit much, but I think maybe setting the higher goal means we can have something tangible in 15 years.
Talking about higher goals here, some people are saying the reason why we have a longer list of goals is because the results of Millennium Development Goal or efforts to achieve those goals were not very successful. That's probably why we are carrying this on and carrying further down the road. What's your response to that kind of observation?
I agree in part to the fact that the MDG have a very mixed results, actually have success and have failure. But if we assume that development itself is a daunting task, very difficult job for any nation and the whole international community, still the UN initiative is a great and a bold initiative by the United Nations and international community because, as I mentioned, that they committed to mobilize and coordinate their approach to help these developing nations.
Some people say, however, since this time, sustainable development goals, they're developed with participation of developing countries, the so-called the South. Perhaps the coordination and cooperation would be even tougher than what we had past. What do we see there?
That might be the case, but actually because their participation in setting this agenda, their participation means that they have a commitment to implement what they have agreed in adopting these new 17 goals and 169 targets. So otherwise, we can go nowhere. It's not just simply the political the commitment, but also some kinds of maybe implicit legal, not actually, it's a little bit binding agreement compared to the previous one. So I assume because of the expansion of this agenda is to reflect all major parties' concerns. For example, when I see like more specific about environmental issues and climate, just not just simply the environment, climate, but also underwater species, all this more specific. So that actually reflection of the NGO's participation in the process. That actually will help us get there. I'm sure.
Yes, there must be limitations. Politically speaking, it's just a political document in the sense that it's a compromise among different ideas, views, and arguments. On the other hand, there are certain limitations by financial resources. It all comes to the money, and financing is the most difficult problem to implement this program.
And also, I think that, because actually, Dr. Song, you mentioned about the diplomatic the conflict among the major powers are concerned. But actually, these 17 items are common security issues for humankind. So it's common goods for everybody, not just benefiting the developing country or developed country. It's good for everybody. So there's a commitment can be made by both parties, actually, developing or developed countries. And also, it clearly specifies the partnership. The previous one is like assistance coming from the developed country to developing country. But this one is like a collaboration among between the developing countries and developed countries. So developing country would not just simply be benefiting from this one, but they have to make their own contribution in eradicating all this area, for example, poverty.
One could say that because those are basic goals, it's easier to make an agreement on it. But as Secretary General Ban said, the devil is the details. It's implementation. Now, we've been seeing some movements that instead of just individual countries going at it, especially the OECD, is kind of focusing on the multilateral approach, using international organizations, so to speak. Now, do we see the difference in the strategies and methodologies? Is it getting at these global challenges?
I think that into the future there will be some kinds of monitoring or the system we can see. Maybe every year we can review the progress we can make in the front, and then actually the reporting is a very important one. It's not just voluntary reporting, it's a mandate reporting system. So everybody, if they really serious about their reputation or image in international community, they have to make a very clear commitment and implementing their commitment and by doing concrete action. It's just rhetoric. Concrete action, what you have done for the past year, and then every year at the United Nations General Assembly, I think there will be a review process about this.
I'm sure the tough assessment about the progress being made every year is a very important one. We have so much to cover in terms of details about this new set of sustainable development goals. However, we have to move on here, and we will have to talk about the Korea's role, indeed, about what Korea will do. And President Park Geun-hye herself expressed some of the pictures about what Korea is ready to contribute. So let's take a look at this part of the speech, and then we'll continue on with our discussion here.
저는 앞으로 2030 지속가능 개발 의제를 이행해 나가는데 몇 가지 중요한 사항들을 지켜나가야 한다고 생각합니다. 우선 개발 전략을 수립하고 시행하는 과정에서 사람을 중심에 놓고 경제, 사회, 환경을 아우르는 균형 발전에 정책의 우선순위를 두어야 한다고 생각합니다. 한국의 성공적인 농촌 개발 전략인 새마을 운동을 신농촌 개발 패러다임으로 발전시켜서 개도국의 농촌 개발을 적극 지원할 계획입니다. 개도국들의 현재 상황과 현실에 맞춰서 우리의 새마을 운동 경험과 노하우가 적절하게 공유될 수 있도록 UNDP 및 OECD와 지속적으로 협력해 나갈 것입니다. 우리 모두가 함께 힘을 모을 때 2030 지속가능 개발 의제라는 인류의 여정이 위대한 결실을 이루어낼 것입니다. 그 길을 가는 과정에서 한국은 항상 여러분의 든든한 파트너가 되겠습니다. 감사합니다.
Right. So she mentioned, the commitment of Korea in terms of making contributions to this cause. Overall, of course, it was a short speech, the way I see it, 7 minutes. So a lot of different points were kind of condensed inside. Overall, her expression of Korea's commitment and then plan to implement this commitment. What's your overall observation or assessment?
Yeah, I got a feeling that President Park is very confident and proud of the Koreans' achievement in the area of development. Korea is a role model of the many developing nations and United Nations member states.
Right.
As she seems to be suggesting that based on our experience and our achievement, the world can learn from Korea, and Korea is ready to help them. She mentioned the Semaul Undong as the propel of the Korean development, and now she is interested in expanding Korean experience into the global level. So she has made a commitment to the influence and prosper this program into international community as a whole. I think that she is right that Semaul Undong can be a good model for new global Semaul movement, and Korea can be a good place to expose these ideas into all the community.
I understand the whole idea of Semaul Undong, the rural development program that Korea has experienced, is based upon the idea of self-reliance.
That's right.
Right. To what extent do you think that kind of idea of self-reliance, rural communities helping themselves, is actually practical and plausible in different development country settings?
Yeah. When we talk about the development, we very much think of the ODA and external assistance from the international community to developing nations. But the important experience we Koreans had in our past history of development is that the idea of self-help can do spirit or cooperation among the community and the government leadership. So I think that most of these developing nations can learn. They have to do something, their own housework, rather than depending and demanding the international assistance. I think in that sense, the Semaul Undong gives them a lot of implications and lessons.
My take on her statement, I think her statement carries very specific items.
Right, that's true.
That, for example, pledge $200 million for young girls.
Right.
That's very concrete. Second, actually, when she mentioned about the Semaul movement, she mentioned about we are going to work with UNDP and OECD. Institutional collaboration between the international community, actually organization, in sending our model overseas. That's very concrete. And third, actually, she mentioned that we are going to join the International Assistance Transparency Organization. Of course, she reaffirmed our commitment to the increase of ODA, but actually not just simply increasing the whole amount of official development assistance, but also transparency is the core. Actually, those are very concrete items she delivered. Actually, I think that those three items upgraded our proposal in a very concrete way.
She highlighted those areas, but of course, those not the only ones that we will do. Actually, there are 17 priorities.
So Semaul Undong is not limited to agricultural reform or the reform of the mindset. It's can be spread to other areas of the whole national reform efforts for self-help, diligence, and cooperation. In this regard, the Semaul Undong spirit can be a source of this new global movement for development.
So starting from the community levels, just the nationwide expansion of it, that's the overall idea, right?
Yes, actually, the Semaundong can be seen as a kind of capacity building program for for the target countries. Just not just simply giving them the assistance, but actually helping them know how to catch fish.
Right.
I see.
So this capacity building program is the one actually she is focusing very much, because we got all this experience from our own history from the 70s. So I think this is more just giving them the money or the assistance, but actually help them to be more self-reliant, as you mentioned.
Okay.
What other areas can Korea lead? I mean, we've been giving some great concerted efforts in education
Right.
and climate change issues, and also, as you mentioned, the Semao Undong. Do you think that the other areas that highlight the Korea's leadership?
I think that's, of course, the climate change. We are the host country of GCF, the Global Climate Fund, and GGGI. So I think we can make contribution. Nowadays, we are emphasizing this climate change very much. And second, of course, agriculture sector. Maybe the other sector or item is like a public health issue. So we have experienced kind of MERS and also, but actually we have gone through very serious health problems in the 70s and 80s. I think those, actually, the developed countries, they don't have that kind of experience. But our own experience has more applicability to those who are in need.
Right.
So I think those are the areas we can make a huge contribution.
Yeah, I'd like to point out the education sector.
Of course,
Korea
that's very
is
important,
another role model of the world in successful education. I think that education is important because it's the foundation of national development by producing talented people and human resources. I think that President also mentioned that the education and United Nations itself very much emphasized by Secretary General Ban Ki-moon as what we call Global Education First Initiative and UNESCO program on education for all. And all these global agenda on education very much matched by the Korean success. So I think that Korea can do much more in terms of the education for all.
Certainly looks like education tops the list in terms of like what Korea can show to the world, among other things, of course. But a day before, I suppose, President Park's speech, Pope Francis actually spoke at the same podium, talking about increasing the polarization of the world, increasing inequality, and he has some strong words about what the world should do, especially the world's leading economies and the governments addressing the issue of inequality and polarization. Korea, if any country, is one of the most, one country that has received the most help, the largest amount of help from the UN, and perhaps a country that United Nations has made the most difference, indeed, in the history. So, as a country that has benefited so much from the UN, if UN is indeed serious about addressing this question about polarization and inequality that Pope emphasized, what do you think Korea can do on that front?
I think Korea is in a quite unique position. So we were recipient of international assistance, but now we have become a donor. So actually, we have gone through all the difficulties as a developing country, but we are entering the developed country circle. So we can bring these developing countries and developed countries together. Actually, that was played by in the climate change issue as well. So I think that Korea can bring these two poles together to the middle.
Kind of bridging role.
Exactly, the middle poles. That's why we have to collaborate with the like-minded middle countries in the world to bring the poles together. So we don't need to have those two poles opposing each other. We have to come to the common points where all the common benefit can be shared by all the members of international community.
Right.
As you mentioned, the climate change is one of the models that Korea has been pushing. We have GCF in our country and GGGI.
And also, I like to highlight, because actually President Park Geun-hye's speech and her concrete program have highlighted Korea as a global player. That's quite important. For example, I have been attending so many seminars and conferences internationally, but actually some people are now said, global Korea is forgotten. but actually her statement and commitment to these new sustainable development goals actually proved that Korea is a global player. It's becoming a kind of really responsible member of international community.
Korea is a middle power,
right.
and as a middle power, most of these countries emphasize multilateralism,
Right.
and the United Nations is the epitome of this multilateral diplomacy.
Right.
And all these actions and the government programs and policies and speeches are geared towards what we call soft power diplomacy.
Right,
so I
right.
think that this is a great opportunity for Korea. As the president, she makes a good contribution to enhance international status of Korea and prestige to the world.
And not only the soft power, though.
Right,
We
of
have
course.
been preparing for this. I mean, we mentioned GCF, but from the President Lee Myung-bak's days, that has become one of the kind of vision for Korea to make it an engine, and it kind of matches well with the SDG goals. So this could be a kind of strategic move for Korea
Definitely.
to play a great role in the global stage, but at the same time, we push through kind of a national vision as well.
Of course, actually, we have a very clear vision for our own nation, but also as for the globe and the region. So, for example, there's with the concrete ideas about the better life for the people who in needs, and also these things can be done, and also they actually emphasize this collaboration and consultation, all these things. That those things will come together. So
I think it's a very fortunate time for Korea. This year, United Nations marks the 70th anniversary, and Korea as a middle power.
70th, right.
Yeah, and
Anniversary as well.
make a good contribution at the tenure of the Secretary General Ban Ki-moon. So it marks the history that the new initiative was launched by this Secretary General, and Korea is in a position to play a greater role than ever before.
Interesting point. If possible, should we go back to the issue of Semaul Undong here? September 16th, I remember, so what's called Global Semaul Development Network was launched. So what she said here in New York this time in her speech, and all these movements or the actions that we are taking, how do they come together? And what kind of impact? I mean, of course, we do expect serious impact here. How plausible is it?
Yeah,
And
it's
what needs to be
interesting
done?
to note that that network just established, and then she presided the high-level forum on the Semaul Undong, because the Semaul Undong is the kind of exemplary model that many nations embrace. And this is a good time for Semaul Undong to expand, since so many countries already asked advice and joined the network, and they have implemented their own. So I think that they can share their information and experience together in the network. So I think that is a good initiative for Korean government to make this international network so that it can be effectively implemented.
Should we go with the Korean name Semaul Undong or Semaul for this initiative, or should we come up with an English name for it to make it more global and easier for other people to understand?
Personally, I think that we should stick to the Semaul Undong.
You think so?
Because it carries a lot. And also, actually, Semaul Undong is very well known internationally. Of course, President Park mentioned about this. The export of Semaul Undong is been done bilaterally. But establishment of network of the Semaul Undong means a lot. Because actually, not just simply the Korean model, but also the relevant models can be used by others. But have to come together, and knowledge and experience and wisdom can come together.
Right, but one of the kind of pseudo-criticism of that is, well, Semaul Undong is very specific to Korean situation, specific to Koreans' mentality and psyche. It's not really transferable to other countries. Now, how do we respond to that kind of, I don't know if it's a criticism or suggestion.
That's why they have come up with the network. Semaul-Undong network. Of course, we have been exporting the Semaul-Undong to China or somewhere in Southeast Asia. So we have know what have happened in those countries, and then we can have some experience already. So we can share this also some applicability or some limits of exporting the Semaul-Undong to other countries, so we can modify it. So actually, what President Park Geun-hye already mentioned, maybe tailor the development strategy is very necessary. But we cannot start from scratch. We have some kinds of model or guideline or guidance. So that's why the South Korea can be in a quite unique position in providing those lessons. Of course, good lessons and bad lessons. So of course, I hope they don't do the same mistake we have done. So we can say that. So that's the one I think that we have some specialty and merits over other countries.
Interesting, right.
I think we can go back to, in terms of implementation, then, if that's the case, how we monitor and how we evaluate the progress would be very important, as you mentioned. So far, the reporting on the progress of MDG has been voluntary, and there is no really obligations to countries. But now, from next year, the countries are obligated to make their reports on the progress. Now, and kind of connecting it to what President Park said in a speech, she's going to use the power as a chair nation to develop this evaluation mechanism and monitoring mechanism. How important is that, and how can we do that?
I think that's because actually in concurrent session there will be a discussion about this issue. But actually, for example, first of all, we have to have a kind of committee which will carry out this monitoring responsibility. Of course, I think that will be, I hope that will be discussed in the following days in the UN National General Assembly about this issue. So without having a kind of implementing mechanism, it's not possible to have an effective implementation or monitoring system of that. So I hope President Park Geun-hye will push for that, establishment of some kind of monitoring system within the nation, United Nations. So I think that's the next goal we have to accomplish.
Well, let's move on to the overall diplomacy that we see here, the multilateral diplomacy we see. A little bit relating to the previous point that we've been talking about, what she said in the speech and how she's going to do, the what do you call it, the final touch to this. She will be doing the overall global education first initiative related events and the Semaul-Undong related events and all that kind of stuff. So do we see here her plan that will make a real difference in terms of like multilateral diplomacy, meeting with as many people as possible there in New York and making sense out of her speech? Is that what you observe?
Yeah, United Nations as an international organization is a great actor and forum and instrument of international community.
Right.
I think that as a middle power, Korea has an opportunity to promote our own national interest and the global interest together. So I think that this time she appears in UN meetings and she can conduct sort of on-site diplomacy there by meeting so many world leaders. We know that President Obama and Xi Jinping and Putin and other leaders, stakeholders in the Korean Peninsula issues are there. So I think this opportunity provides a good chance for her to mingle with these people and chat and make connections and make some sincere efforts to promote our own agenda besides these global official meetings.
Right. Dr. Che, President Park's first meeting in New York was that with Secretary General Ban Ki-moon. How do you assess that meeting? Was that a good choice in a way in trying to achieve what Professor Park was just mentioning?
Of course, I think that her meeting should of course, started with the Secretary General Pan Ki-moon. That's natural. He's the Secretary General. So actually, that starts from her multilateral diplomacy activities, follow on. So she will meet every other part of the major leaders, international community. So I think she actually goes beyond some simple bilateral diplomacy. So, but actually, the other thing I like to highlight is actually, as I said, we actually go beyond the Korean Peninsula. Wherever people see international community sees Korean Peninsula as North Korean nuclear issue or Korea-Japan dispute, these kinds of things. But actually, I think she appealed to the international community as a global leader, concerned with the great concern of global issues, climate change, poverty, all these issues.
Right.
And tomorrow, this September 27th, President Park will preside over the interactive session of the UN Development Summit with the former Chilean President Michelle Bachelet. What would be the key issues in that session?
We don't have any specific information, but I suspect that the title say effective, inclusive mechanism. I think that basically, as Dr. Choi mentioned, that transparency and monitoring and other mechanism to make this whole set of ideal and good intentions to fruit. I think that that's the main point, how to implement, what kind of mechanism they will have to make this whole system effective and result-oriented.
So I think that the two key words, one is implementation, second word is institutionalization. So actually maybe there will be a discussion about what kinds of mechanisms we should have to guarantee the effective implementation of agreement we made this time. So I think that maybe they will talk about some of the institutional framework over there.
That ties to the evaluation and
of course,
monitoring.
definitely, yes.
And also Monday in New York time, President Park Geun-hye will be giving another keynote speech, this time at the United Nations General Assembly. So that speech together with her meetings, probably brief encounters with heads of states of the United States, China, and perhaps Japan and all that. As an expert on this kind of bilateral matters, what do you see coming out of those kind of encounters?
Of course, actually, everybody concerned what would be the result on North Korean nuclear issue.
Right.
North Korea is presenting.
Do you think she'll be specifically mentioning North Korea in her speech to the General Assembly?
I think at the beginning she would not say so, but as she comes to the end of speech, she will deliver. Korean Peninsula is the remaining divided country, and then North Korea present a very serious threat, not only to South Korea, but also the other international community, violating the NPT regime like that. So not just specific mention about South Korea's own concern, but international community concern over North Korean nuclear issues. So she will cover more general issues at the moment we are facing. I don't know whether she will make some comments on the refugee issue in Europe and the other poverty, ongoing dispute and conflict overseas, and also cybersecurity issue like that. So, but actually, I'm sure she will clearly state about the issue of North Korea.
I mean, she met with Xi Jinping very recently, and of course, she's in close communication with President Obama. But the Prime Minister Abe, because they don't talk very often, this time in New York, do we see anything happening between the two in terms of brief communication?
I don't know whether it's possible or not. Just maybe there could be a brief encounter between these two leaders, but I don't know if it's by intention or by accident. I have no idea. But anyhow, if there is any chance, maybe she would not refuse to meet Premier Abe, actually, because one of the biggest achievements she made in her trip to Beijing last month was the agreement to host the Trilateral Summit at the end of October or early November. So there's no reason for President Park Geun-hye to refuse any kinds of meeting with Prime Minister Abe. If there's a chance, I'm sure that she will meet.
As a follow-up to the nuclear missile issues, I think that I expect the President to make some statement on her own vision on Korean Peninsula Trust process and
of course, unification.
Northeast Asian peace process and Eurasian initiative as well. Also, she may suggest that if North Korea give up the nuclear weapons and
Right.
missile experiments, and then Korea is open to arms to North Korea's,
Maybe I think she will speak on unification issue because actually last 70, this is 70 series. We were saved by the United Nations, so actually we will speak on unification issue. Definitely.
Wouldn't this be an occasion? I mean, we're staying on the General Assembly keynote speech. Because we know that Xi Jinping and Barack Obama already made it really known, or really forcefully known, that North Korea is not going to be accepted as a nuclear country. Now she could probably be more forceful in her General Assembly speech about the principles that we have. It's not just about the South Korean principle, but it's a global
Of course,
and also
definitely.
international principle as it has been settled. So this is a kind of a occasion to put the nail in the putative coffin.
Yeah, well, actually, this actually bring 5 parts together as a one, and then put the pressure on North Korea to give up.
As
this
I
nuclear
remember
weapon.
last year's speech in the General Assembly, she was rather strong, warning to North Korea, and mention about the North Korean human rights abuses as well. But I think that this time she may make some balanced approach in the sense that on the one hand, she make some warning to North Korea, but on the other hand, she will a suggestion that as a gesture to induce North Korea to open up this time.
Right. Professor Song, looks like we have a lot to discuss here, but don't you think we should perhaps wrap up?
Yeah, I think
their
we should do that.
Wrapping our comments. So please share with us. We have covered so much ground here. Sustainable Development Summit and all this upcoming General Assembly speech and all that. Please tell us over your assessment so far and perhaps expectation down the road, starting with Professor Park.
I think that the 70th anniversary of the United Nations founding is a great opportunity for Korea as well. I think that the President Park Geun-hye can make a great contribution to the world, as well as making Korean status as a law there, so that as a whole, the Korea can be recognized as a middle power in real sense.
So I think she has upgraded South Korea's image as a global partner and global power. And so global Korea is a theme we are going to cherish into the future.
Right.
That's one. Actually, but I'm sure that she will come up with a more concrete implementation plan of her own. So as not just it's a simple rhetoric, but we have a clear idea. That's well reflected in her statement, $200 million pledge and also this transparency over all these things. So actually the follow-up should be actually the clear implementation, on-time implementation, the pledge and a commitment that we have made.
Well, we have a lot to say, but we have run out of time, so we want to wrap up this way for this Arirang's very special program, well past midnight here in Korea Live, covering the event that's taking place in New York, that is United Nations Sustainable Development Summit. This has been Kim Byung-ju, of course.
The Korean government is taking an active interest in the SDGs, and we hope that this provides a milestone for Korea, that it can play a more leading role in global challenges in affairs. Thank you for participating and giving us valuable insights, but we most of all thank the viewers for staying with us in this special program. So long.